their pleasure is wired with something not healthy. And all it really takes is a safe space, but the erotic and pleasure experience needs to be greater than what that past association was. And so
Mm.
if they have an erotic or pleasure experience, maybe a kind of orgasm they've never had before in a safe space, then that can supersede that previous wiring. So it's really fascinating how the body remembers everything, including pleasure, and it can be rewired as well.
Hey folks, Allie here, host and creator of the Brilliant Body podcast. And this summer, I recorded a series of conversations with sex experts, and I really wanted to share them with you. You're going to see that they're a lineup. They're going to be pretty much back to back in order to really bring in a variety of perspectives that I suspect will be very helpful to you in many ways, perhaps, because these folks are such experts in their field. Many of them are very well known, and I had the honor of being able to speak with them either because I reached out to them or they reached out to me to be a part of this podcast. So I am thrilled to introduce to you, perhaps for the first time, these sex experts, these body masters, these philosophers, these humans who have so much depth and breadth of experience in the realm of sexuality. So I hope you benefit from these conversations. It was such a pleasure to have them in hopes that they would be a gift to you. So here we go. Rahi combines his training and experience as a California state certified somatic sex educator and sexological bodyworker, certified TRE provider, neuroaffective touch practitioner, life coach with an MA in spiritual psychology, with certifications in family constellations therapy, de-armoring arts, Chi Ne San and Karse Ne San. I hope I pronounced those right. And STREAM, scar tissue remediation and management, in his facilitation of somatic sexual wholeness. His expertise is in the art of genital de-armoring, having trained practitioners worldwide. Hundreds have also graduated from his signature online course, The Three Keys to Genital De-armoring, or via his live trainings and workshops. And I had the great pleasure of meeting Rahi at least 25 years ago now on the dance floor, on Joe Cobbett's dance floor, another guest of the Brilliant Body podcast. And we immediately liked each other, kept seeing each other on the dance floor for every week, months, years, and now decades. Both of us ended up getting drawn to family constellation therapy and training in it, and also in the sexological space. So here we are reconvening to have this conversation for you today. Here we go. The very brilliant and very beautiful Rahi Chun. Hold on. What did you just say?
I said, there she is.
How are you?
Hi, I'm well. I'm well. Callie, I
Uh,
was thinking today when I emailed you yesterday, I was like, wow, this is so cool that we started on the dance floor, like somatically embodied, and here we are, like holding space now. It's so cool. It's like this whole trajectory.
I know. I was just saying that when I was recording your bio in the intro, and I explained exactly that we met on the dance floor almost 30 years ago, Rahi. It's been a long time.
That is crazy.
Yeah, and
You're right.
neither of us were yet into
No,
constellation work. We
totally.
weren't into the sexological space yet.
Yes.
And I was just reading your bio and your about on your website. Jesus Christ, man, the amount of training you've done, the amount of mastery that you have, the amount of obvious commitment and fascination you have for sexuality, which, as you know, and it talks about, is that sexual energy is spiritual energy. So I think that's a really good place to start because
Mhm.
I'm still, you could say, coming out in
Mm,
public
mm.
as being as focused on sexuality as I am in my professional and my personal life, and always have been. And I have no doubt, both I know my astrological chart is full of it. I'm sure yours is too. Clearly,
Totally.
we're
Yeah.
born to be a sexual healer.
Mm.
And of course, we've taken different paths to do that. But let's just start there. As
Cool. Sounds
tell me,
great.
yeah, tell me about this as a spiritual path. which is also obviously in both of us, I know you well enough to know, is also the path of embodiment.
Yeah, they really can't be. People try to separate things to understand things compartmentally, but they're really one and the same. Our spiritual energy is our sexual energy. And when the erotic energy is fully embodied, people do have spiritual experiences, just consciousness downloads, a deeper sense of purpose, intuition, creativity, and also I find that the deeper we surrender to our erotic wisdom, the more accessible these deeper layers of wounds are from our adolescence, from our childhood, and even from before birth. It's very fascinating, this portal that opens up, and it is spiritual and it's very accessible erotically. I think the simplest way for me to explain it to someone or to share my point of view is my belief is that we all come from the same cosmos, the same cosmic energy, and we come into human form through this sacred act of sexuality. So, if you consider we're all part of this one cosmos that is a spiritual consciousness, but to enter into the human realm, it requires a really magnificent act. And that act is one of sexuality. So, we're born of these two spiritual and sexual forces,
Yeah.
and that is what we are. And I think it is such a privilege to be able to consciously and intentionally explore what that really means for each of us. And it's different for each of us.
Indeed. And of course, so many quote unquote spiritual traditions, i.e., the church, et cetera,
Yes.
has put the kibosh, saying that lightly, it's an understatement, on sexual exploration and reverence and experience and pleasure, et cetera. So therein is the ultimate irony, in my view.
Yeah, it is. And I think it comes down to a couple of things. I think most religions have a very strong systemic patriarchy. And it's really ironic because spirituality is really there's so much mysteriousness about it. But I think something about maybe the male archetype and the patriarchal archetype is that it wants to try to define everything and control everything. And sexuality cannot be controlled. And particularly the powerful energy of the feminine, it's not to be controlled. And I think that's part of the reason why historically these religions that were organized by men to try to understand what's not understandable has put the kibosh on sexuality.
Yeah.
And I think we're suffering as a society. The work we do is such a privilege to get a peek into human nature through the sexual lens. And when we see the incredible void of sexual autonomy and education about one's own body and its capacity, and then witness what's possible in a client when they do fully realize or start to inhabit that power, the world would be so changed. All of these passive aggressive aggressions from war to just treating people like we're not the same family would, I think, really be significantly altered if we used our own kind of inner pharmacologic pleasures and dopamine and all of that to feed ourselves.
Yes. And also the effect it has on self-esteem. If you feel like you're a really good lover and that you can both receive pleasure and give pleasure, you're obviously going to be in the world in a totally different way and not have to overcompensate in all these aggressive ways that we see the world over.
Yeah, so true. There would be so much more peace within instead of needing to dominate or control. And as an aside, I have this theory about in America, there's this obsession with guns.
Yes.
I just think it's such a phallic symbol for men wanting a bigger gun, more bullets, like this power thing. And I think if men really got in touch with their inner gun and their inner bullets, the potent chi within, I think there would not be a need for that obsession on the external realm.
Agree with you 1,000%. So this is so not where I saw this conversation going, but this is what comes. What do you think of this incel phenomenon going on right now?
Incel.
Oh, yeah, it's I don't even know what it stands for. I'll put it in the notes, but these guys who are involuntarily celibate and
Uh-huh.
taking it out in all these incredibly aggressive, if not violent ways, both online and in the world. And it's called incels. And
Yeah,
it's super scary.
yeah. I didn't know that's the term, but I have read about it. I think it is a kind of a deep inner rebellion against, I mean, there's this phenomenon happening in the States where I think a lot of young men are feeling very disillusioned because, metaphorically speaking, women are standing taller than men. They're graduating from universities or having higher degrees or increasing their income. They're independent. And so I think a lot of young men in this country are resorting to video games and porn because they need to feel good and feel like they're a winner in some way because they can't compete out there. And so I think this incel phenomenon is part of rejecting that part of themselves that is natural and is naturally attracted to the feminine that now is empowered and they don't know how to deal with it. That's how I see it. And the aggressiveness, I think, is that sexual energy. I'm not a fan of I think ejaculation should be very intentional. However, if you don't understand how to consciously circulate that energy, if it's simply a repression, it's going to come out in really shadowy ways. And that's what I see happening.
Yes. Oh boy, do we talk now?
Where
Huh,
shall we go?
where to which direction do we wanna go in? But I think this would be a great segue into what is genital armoring, because we've been talking about more cultural armoring, literally even this violence, war and guns and
Yeah.
aggression and violence and all this stuff. But how does that translate? For example, we'll talk first about male bodies or
Mm.
cisgender male bodies, perhaps all male bodies. How does that show up in actual penis tissue and how people are experiencing their male genitals?
Allie, it's been so fascinating to see this younger generation of all genders and the issues that are being presented in their bodies as a result of porn culture. So there are young men now who have been so conditioned in their bodies to have sexual arousal stimulation and ejaculation based on a screen
Yeah.
that they can't do it with another human being. It's mind blowing to me. But in answer to your question, genital armor, which I define as the unconscious guarding patterns within the tissues and fascia of the genitalia, that often shows up as numbness or pain, discomfort, or desensitization. In male bodies, it can show up like really anywhere along the penile shaft. The frenulum and the undershaft or the raphe tends to be wonderfully sensitive in a healthy penis, but in a lot of armored penises, they will be desensitized. And this can come as a result of aggressive masturbation, or I would say mindless masturbation, which most porn is, because your attention is on the screen, not on
Yes.
your body's sensations. And so you're abusing your body, not attuning to what it wants, pace, pressure. You're just fixated on this stimulus, which we know are designed to produce larger and larger dopamine hits. So people go to bigger, more kind of intense porn, which numbs you even more. So there's that phenomenon. And then there's another phenomenon where somehow I think men weaned on porn. I had a client call me, very Ivy League educated entrepreneur, kind of a leader, like a future leader of our society. And he was like, there's this woman in Vancouver. I'm falling in love with her. I think if I can just pound her for 30 minutes, she'll really like me. So, this is how these young folks are being educated about what's desirable in sex.
Yeah.
And so, of course, when you're pounding mindlessly, the sensitivity along the base of the shaft can start to numb and those tissues can harden as well. And that can impede not only sensation, but blood flow.
Yeah.
And then we can get into just any kind of armoring around security and safety issues. It's going to happen in the pelvic floor and around the anal sphincter. And so most men are pretty armored around the anus.
Mhm. Out of homophobia
Yeah.
mostly or other
Well,
things? Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
other things, definitely homophobia.
Mhm.
And I tell most men, female bodies have this wonderful orifice in the front to stimulate the nerves of the pelvic bowl. Us guys, we just have it from the backside. just to awaken aliveness and vitality in the pelvic bowl. There are all these wonderful nerves. But homophobia is a big one. Then a lot of it is also the prostate. The tissue of the prostate has been shown to be analogous to the tissue of the uterus. And
Mhm.
so when men have unbirthed life dreams, what they wanted to manifest, that hardening happens in the prostate. So most prostates are also armored, and which is why most men have not experienced prostate-induced orgasms.
And are getting prostate cancer, it seems at quite a rapid rate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the number two killer in America, prostate cancer. And most men just assume when they get to a certain age, they're going to get it.
Yeah. Do you believe, I imagine you do, or actually know that is correlated to lack of circulation, just inflammation from lack of stimulation, use, pleasure,
Yes.
release, all of
Yes, like self prostate massage. I'm going to be a little graphic here. After a guy finishes his bowel movement, if he just has some castor oil next to his toilet, because that
Mhm.
sitting position actually shortens the anal canal, just as it does the vaginal canal, the more the knees come closer to the chest. After you clean yourself up and use a bidet or whatever, it's just a great way to self massage your prostate to make sure there's no coagulated blood or coagulated semen in the area, which can lead to inflammation.
There's so many other things I wanna talk to you about that I'm just gonna mention here that you have a fantastic episode on your podcast, Organic Sexuality with Charlie Glickman, that
Oh,
you guys go comprehensively into the topic of prostate pleasure and exploration and healing. So I just wanna sidebar that, and we'll put that in the notes. I wanna come back to this concept of pounding too, because what that also reflects is such a profound lack of education of what a vagina even is and its own capacity. Because when a vagina is de-armored, of course, I want to hear all about your perspective in it.
yeah.
There is so much opportunity to engage with that vaginal tissue and the cervix and all those places that are named with different
Yes.
alphabets about this thing and that thing. But of course, everyone's unique.
Mhm.
And all of that, it can become available to stimulate with much more subtlety and conscious awareness than clearly your
Yeah.
guy was referring to.
Yes.
So tell us about that, about vaginal armoring and how you most commonly see that show up.
Sure. I'm going to start by sharing this statistic, Allie, and that is studies in America have shown that the average woman, and this study was done in America, requires, not desires or prefers, but requires between 20 and 45 minutes of foreplay for their full erogenous capacity. We're talking about the engorgeable tissues of the urethral sponge, the perineal sponge, the clitoral complex, for their full erogenous capacity to be available. And the average lovemaking session in America is somewhere between 3 and 7 minutes.
Jeez. Oh, that's
Okay.
horrifying.
It is horrifying. It is horrifying. Now,
Yeah.
you and I are in this field, so that's not our experience, but that's the average out there. So, when it comes to vaginal armoring, the vast majority of vulva owners are being penetrated way before their body's even wanting it. And this is what causes those tissues that are super sensitive. I mean, the clitoris has no other function than pleasure. These are parts of the body that are designed for intimacy, for sensitivity, for an exploration of what's possible in arousal and pleasure. And they're not even being warmed up. And so, of course, those sensitive tissues are going to harden up or guard itself to protect itself from a physical and emotional experience that's unwanted. And
Mhm.
so I tell clients they're in loving relationships. They've been with their partner 5, 10, years, and armor forms with someone you love because there's just, as you said, an absence of proper education about the erogenous capacity and potential of the vulva, the vagina, the cervix, the penis, the prostate, all of it, the whole body. So there are specific de-armoring techniques to de-armor, for example, the clitoris as opposed to the G spot or the K spot as opposed to the cervix. But the basic is safety. We need the nervous system to be
Mhm.
really down regulated. Otherwise, any kind of touch is really just not going to meet its full potential for reception, pleasure, and sensitivity.
So touching, the lack of safety that so many of us feel. What are some basic ways that you teach your students and clients to offer as well as receive more sense of safety? Because,
Yes.
of course, like I was just thinking, a lot of people think, oh, it's the female bodies that need to be reassured that they're safe. But of course, male bodies feel like they've got to perform all the time and they're being expected, and that does not going to feel safe. You know, their penis has to be a certain size, or it has to last a certain length, or it has to. There's so much dissociation from genitals in general. It's just sad. That is not going to feel safe. You can't feel safe if you're dissociated.
It's so true. And so the first thing is what you're speaking to is in my three keys to genital de-armoring course. I say at the outset, this course is really about reestablishing an intimate relationship of consent with your own body,
Mm,
because that's where it starts.
mm.
And too many of us have been, as children, told to hug our Uncle Tony or our Aunt Jenny when we didn't want to, or finish your food, or do things to our body that we didn't want.
Yeah.
That's where it starts. And so what I do is I have people really take an inventory of how did they learn to have a relationship of consent with their body or a relationship of non-consent with their body. Because once we understand the root, it's much easier to unravel. It's really dangerous what a people pleasing conditioning does because it happens without even our consciousness. It becomes reflexive. And that shows up in the bedroom and with sexuality and penetration and oh, I'm kind of warmed up. Should I just go with it? I don't want to put him off. We're in the mood. All of these things. And if you just have the understanding of each other's consent history from the beginning, and if I understood, or if my partner understood, oh, okay, I've got this people pleasing thing, let's create a safe word and just say pause when we just need to pause or slow down. I swear to God, if half my clients just learned how to slow down and pause and take goal or results off the table and then incorporate one way touch, that's a huge thing. So, with my clients and learning how to reestablish a relationship of consent, those are the kind of the keys. Consent with oneself, learning safe words, safe gestures, knowing how to advocate for their body, and then start with one way touch with your partner. And I've got clients who were married for 30 years. They've never done one way touch with each other.
Explain what that is, because a lot of people may not even know what that means.
Sure. Well, so one way touch is so simple and it's so magical because one person has no responsibility whatsoever, but just to be present to the sensations of receiving that one way touch. Hence, it's one way. No obligation to give back. You're just there to receive touch. And so it's wild because if you think about it, when we start dating, sexuality is so charged. I think most people have this, oh, are they going to like what I do? Am I going to respond to their touch? And it's two people going at it. And
Mm.
it's like you're going at it, your unconscious is there or your hypervigilance is there, and you've never really taken the time to learn your partner's body in a non-pressured, non-goal oriented space. What kinds and quality of touch on what parts of the erogenous area of the body is it really like? And that's what one touch really serves. And there's so many couples who get blown away by, oh my God, I never knew the lower belly would respond. I never knew her inner thighs or the back of her knees, or, there's so many areas, the wrist or the elbow, and they're blown away. And it becomes this whole new thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you're pointing out, one of the many gifts of doing that is that an individual who may not know their own body gets to discover as well. Because a lot of sexologists talk about, well, how can your partner know what you want and need unless you know what you want and need? But not everybody's comfortable spending that time self-pleasuring, aka masturbating, to discover what they like, or even if they know what they like, they may not be able to communicate, or they might be used to self-pleasuring in a particular way, i.e., jerking off in a particular way with a toy or in the same neurological pattern. and not get to experience what it would be like when somebody else's creativity and love and care and curiosity come into it.
Mhm.
I also just want to mention something when you were talking about tissues that aren't ready, particularly vaginal tissue, which is that there can be complexity in even our own internal consent because part of us might sexually or physically really want, for example, to even be pounded. And
Yeah.
yet emotionally, we may not be ready, which is why I work a lot with the heart sexuality split because
Mm.
so prevalent in people. And how do we navigate when we aren't just one simplistic 100% all systems go or all
Yeah.
systems stop? In a
Yes.
lot of us, there's a complex mishmash of yeses and nos and maybe and all this stuff. So again, one-way touch is a great way to take some of that off the table, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like our body's mind can change moment to moment.
Yes.
Just because someone gives consent in one moment, a few moments later, maybe they change their mind. And we want to invite that, the complexity of the body. But what you're speaking to, Ali, is so important because studies have shown that the pleasure, the sexual pleasure that a body experiences, especially in a vulva owner, is directly correlated to the emotional safety and the emotional connection. So that heart mind pelvis connection is so, so key to sexual health and vitality.
You don't think that's true with penises as well, but we've been socialized to believe that penises have a mind of their own and there's somehow just this flesh roll attached to the guy. And like,
Yeah,
don't you
I
think
do. I
it's
do.
really underestimated how emotionally sensitive penises are too, but often just overridden?
Yes, I think they're both true. In other words, I think one, more research has been done on female bodies around the heart genital connection. And
Yes.
so I don't think there's been enough research to show that in penis owners. And I do think that because penis owners' arousal systems are much shorter, for a guy to get fully engorged, it takes a much shorter time. And I think there's something about that because I think for the arousal system, because it is so spacious for vulva owners, or can be so spacious, it's not always. In other words, vulva owners can get very fully engorged in a shorter amount of time than 20 minutes as well. But my point is, I think there's more time for that intimacy to evolve for a vulva owning body. And a penis owning body, just thinking back to when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, when that erotic energy builds up, it's it can really lead to decision to regrets, let's say later on.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it can.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it can. So I was going somewhere else, but this is so essential, Rahi. The whole thing about the body will lead us astray. I wrote a whole paper on this in college about this belief that therefore, because the body and pleasure and sexuality will lead us to sin,
Uh,
which is a worse word for regret, then we've got to control it. So I have often in my particularly younger life regretted what my body so felt drawn to and wanted to do. And then I would go back and forth between going, well, my body did know something. And even if it came out badly for me, for them, for the situation, potentially for others, I have to trust that my body was doing what it needed to do, even if it was perpetuating or expressing a dysfunctional pattern. Or are there just cases where the body is just all systems go hormonally and we just get ourselves into all kinds of messes when we unleash those compulsivities? What do you think about that?
oh my gosh, this is a really juicy topic, and there's so many layers to it, right? So many
Yeah.
layers to it, because I would like to believe that the body's wisdom is always supreme. And yet, you bring up a really important point, which is hormones. The way hormones can affect desire, libido, drive, all of that is very significant. I did an intake just yesterday or the day before, and this client was sharing how, for the first time, she felt she didn't dissociate when she was receiving touch because that was her history, given her trauma background. But it was a combination of one, she was ovulating, which is a factor. Two, she was on this hyperthyroid medication that accentuated reception of touch. And then there was one other factor, but these are so there's so many elements here. Now,
Yeah.
again, I believe that the body is ultimately wise and brilliant in its inherent wisdom, but it really comes down to how skilled are we in attuning to that higher wisdom? And are we bypassing that higher wisdom based on our egoic desire?
Is
Yeah,
it ego?
ego. Well, what I mean to say is, for example, like some people have a sexual identity they want to affirm. And so they'll engage in something that they may not fully want to, but it affirms how they want to see themselves sexually. And I think that's separate than really attuning to the body's desire. That's like more of a mental egoic, a mental agenda around being perceived a certain way sexually than it is their body's desire.
Okay, great. I'm glad that was clear. So by egoic, you didn't mean, I was also a little thrown off by higher because our many cultures associate what's higher as being better or wiser.
Mm,
And Philip Shepard talks a lot about lower consciousness, our
mm,
pelvic
mm,
genius,
mm,
and that
mm.
being our lower consciousness, which I love, closer to the earth and perhaps it knowing better, which can get confusing because our genitals are also in our pelvic bowl and our lower consciousness. And so, again, when you're feeling horny, is that a natural radar that knows what it's doing and doing something that's for the best for us, even if it gets us into trouble? I want to
Right.
add that because
Yeah.
humans don't like to be hurt, endangered. Well, maybe some people do in painful situations or cause pain in general. And yet we can be just powerfully drawn to people that are familiar to somebody else we are not resolved about,
Yes.
be that a previous love, be that a family member, be that some, as you were talking about, egoic pattern that is needing to be brought to the light, even in that collie destructiveness that can ensue.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yes.
so, but yes, it can be so difficult to, and how often, I have to say, I have not experienced that a lot in my life where I am in entirety, all aspects of myself are aligned with
Mhm.
a choice, sexual choice. And that can be with any given person I've been with, or it could be any given instance, which is what you're talking about with couples who have been together a long time. A lot
Yes.
of people, they are not aligned, completely aligned. I actually want to have sex with this person right now. And the other person really wants to have sex with them, heart, body, mind, soul, right now. That is sad too, because so many people are placating their partner, as you said, or just giving into it because that's
Yes.
what's expected, or that's another version of an egoic
Mm.
manifestation.
Totally. Totally. So what you're speaking to, Ali, is the ultimate higher. Okay, I don't want to use those terms, but I feel like what you're speaking to is at the end of the day, like when you look at it from an existential point of view, then everything counts and everything serves consciousness. So I think that's what you're speaking to. And I agree from a family constellations point of view, the reason why we have this magnetic, very strong kind of bond or karmic curriculum to resolve with someone is because something from a past life or something from a different generation needs to be resolved. And so, yeah, there is something on an existential level that is also being worked out. And one of the most intense, potent, powerful ways is to work it out sexually. So that's another element in the mix here.
And some of us are more highly sexed than others. And so we choose that as our
Yeah. Yeah.
playground slash battlefield.
Yes. Yes. Our portal of consciousness.
Our
Yeah.
portal of consciousness. That's a much nicer way to put it. Yeah. Geez Louise, man, it's really tough. And of course, as we get older, hopefully we're having less and less regrets and less messes. And in my case, that's led to longer periods of celibacy, though, because it's harder and harder to find partners with whom, or a partner with whom I can be completely, utterly aligned.
Well,
And
that's the irony of, yeah, I think those of us in the field, and I speak with a lot of other sexological body workers, it's challenging
yeah.
because you know so much, you've seen so much in working with clients, you know so much about yourself because that's inherent in doing the work that we do. And like, you don't want to be someone's counselor or teacher in the bedroom. That's just not sexy. So yeah, it can be challenging for sure.
Ooh, I could say a lot about that, but I want to come back to something else that I think is so important that a lot of people don't know about. If you come back to that one-way touch or even two-way touch,
Mm.
and what I find so much in the sexological world is people are talking about increasing sensation
Mm.
and pleasure and
Mm.
orgasmicity, but they're not necessarily speaking to the holistic experience of ourselves as bodies that necessarily, as our tissues are touched, will also bring up memory, for some
Mm.
people, negative flashbacks, trauma, joy, playfulness, fear, grief, all these things. And I'd love for you to talk about that because, of course, when you're in the de-armoring process with people, they're going to touch on all these things. And when people are in the bedroom with each other, their own partner, if they're allowed to feel that all of a sudden when their back of their knee is touched, I just reminded me of when I was sitting in high school with my brother's best friend who started touching me on the back of the knee and I felt awkward and weird and things like that. If there's
Yes.
space, then
Yes.
people can feel so much more safety. And
Mhm.
also, it invites just even physiologically, as you were saying before, the more safety we feel, the more pleasure we feel allowed to feel, that
Mhm.
those just feed on themselves. It's just like this beautiful spiral that you could be sobbing and you know it's okay to sob or suddenly be afraid or suddenly need to stop. And then all of a sudden, if that's allowed,
Mm.
capacity for physiological, neurological greater pleasure and energetic pleasure comes
Yes.
in. Of course, you're an expert in all of this. Please talk about it.
Well, it's so fascinating, isn't it? It's so once again, the safety not only allows the pleasure to deepen and expand to terrains it never have experienced before, but the other thing safety does is it creates a container for those past traumatic memories to actually feel safe enough to come to the surface, to be metabolized. So, just exactly what you're describing, whether they're cellular memories of sadness or grief or like that unwanted touch at the back of the knee, if you're not feeling safe with someone, then the hypervigilance or the nervous system is not going to be in a state where those past memories feel safe enough to come up, much less the emotions associated
Yeah.
with those past memories. So, it's really ironic, but a lot of clients will come in and they'll be like, I'm in the safest relationship I've ever been in, and I'm getting flashbacks left and right. And I always have to say, this is a testament to how safe you feel and how your soul is ready to metabolize these things that were buried for years or decades. But it's really important that the partner then realize that it's not about them. It's actually because of their safety that all of this material can be metabolized. But oh my gosh, in the session space, as us practitioners know, blocked out memories can come back in ways where the client momentarily doesn't even realize they're in a session space anymore. They can be 7 years old and their skirt is being lifted by the babysitter as like a sheet is being lifted from their knees, like things like that. Or I once had a client where she was prostituted as a child. She lived in kind of this, it was like a border town in Texas. She was prostituted as a child, 8, 9 years old, and she blocked out those memories because her mother was involved in the economy of that. And so, as we know, for a young child, they have to block out those memories. Otherwise, they would go insane knowing that their caretaker is putting them in these dangerous situations. And it wasn't until her late 30s that these memories started flooding back. But once again, she was in a place where she was married, she had enough resource, she had a good business. Her environment was safe for her to deal with all of those memories and that trauma. It's true that the body keeps the score and the body remembers everything. And so the wonderful thing is the body remembers pleasure. Like before traumatic incidences, when we were a child or an infant, or maybe even going back to the womb, the body remembers how euphoric it felt cellularly. And so that can be reminded of again as well. And when it comes to rewiring, I have a lot of clients who their pleasure is wired with something not healthy. Either
Mm,
a parent humiliated them or cheated on them. And so they're continually drawn to partners that resemble that
mm.
association. And all it really takes is a safe space, but the erotic and pleasure experience needs to be greater than what that past association was. And so,
Mm.
if they have an erotic or pleasure experience, maybe a kind of orgasm they've never had before in a safe space, then that can supersede that previous wiring. So, it's really fascinating how the body remembers everything, including pleasure, and it can be rewired as well.
Yeah, I've long suspected that a lot of kink is a means to access and or avoid
Mm,
some of those darker emotional associations neurologically bound into that
yes.
sexuality. And as the late, brilliant, beloved Jack Morin talked about, is
Mm,
how we can heal our pain, our early pain through pleasure. And there can be consciousness around that or compulsivity that comes in and the need to re-experience that original pain over and over again, physically and emotionally, psychologically, which
mm,
can lead to a lot of exciting experience. But
mm,
is it just continuing to reinstate that same trauma or those same neurological limitations as you're describing, and or really liberate the body and allow this other aspect of one's sexual identity and pleasure and fun and recreation and intimacy? What do you
mhm.
think of that?
It's such a great question, Ali, because it really depends on the intentionality of the container. So I'll give you an example. I had a client, psychiatrist in his 50s. He could only have sex with strangers that involved humiliation and leather. And when we did the intake, sure enough, he grew up in the Midwest as a gay boy. His father would, in his words, kick the shit out of him with leather boots.
Jeez.
Right? So there's the leather association and humiliation. And so he was leading a very unhealthy life, very dangerous. I mean, you can imagine like he had to have sex with strangers that involved humiliation. But this was the association, the wiring of what he experienced, the kind of attention he got from his dad came in this form. And his unconscious was yearning for that. So once again, in our sessions, we had to find ways to provide an experience of pleasure where he felt safe, where the pleasure was greater or more desired by his body than those involving leather and humiliation. And once he was able to repair, reassociate pleasure that didn't involve humiliation, now he had a choice. It's not that it directly replaced it. He still gets like like an arousal spike with that
Yeah.
suggestion, but now he has an alternative choice that's healthier.
Well, not only that, it's also possible that with that alternative, it can allow for more loving, intimate relationships that can then accept that other kink or fetishy aspect of self as fantasy or maybe as shared play, but
Yeah,
that it's not the primary way that would necessitate being in unhealthy, unloving relationships to have, if
exactly.
you can call them relationship.
Yeah. But the other thing you bring up is the play. Clients who are in loving relationships can easily create a container. Let's say, for example, if I was beaten by a cop when I was a kid by a baton and I have this trauma memory, my partner can dress up as a cop. We can create like a kink that's
Yeah.
similar, but I'm in control. And so it
Yes.
turns that traumatic story on its head and uses erotic, sexualized energy to make me feel, give me my agency and resource back.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
love it.
many creative ways of
Yes.
using kink. But again, I see a lot of what's happening in the kink world is unconscious and repeating that
Yes.
traumatic, which keeps it like hardens that neurological wiring. And others in kink space can be creative and use that kink as a container to restore agency in the body and rewrite that traumatic experience.
Love it. I love it. I have so much more to ask you about, and we've already been talking for almost an hour. Can we keep going or do you need to
Or,
go?
oh no, let's keep going.
So, oh, This is like a candy store, Rahi. There's so
Oh, yeah.
much stuff. Oh, that's what I wanted to ask you. So how did you do that? How did you discover what this client needed that would supersede, as you said, this highly charged, perpetual, habituated, neurological, traumatic pattern?
Yeah,
Obviously, you're highly skilled with all gendered bodies. That is clear. But I imagine there's a lot of creativity in that too. Like, how do you keep somebody's focus as you're dealing with their nervous systems, as you're dealing with their resistances? Do you feel like describing, maybe not
sure.
with that client in particular, but I'd be fascinated. I'm sure we all would.
Sure, happy to. So, with all clients, the first thing is really bringing safety into their nervous system so that they can actually be receptive to touch, whatever part of the body that may involve. And then after that, the one-way touch, I really use that heavily because not only, as you pointed out earlier, it informs and educates the body owner of parts of their body that they might have been clueless about that are really pleasurable. It also builds the muscle of actually giving voice to what their body wants. And that's sorely missing in most people. Most of us go into things hoping we get some pleasure out of it, but it can be a fine art to actually advocate for the body in a way that's sexy and inviting and adds juice to it. So with this client, for example, because he wasn't used to the rest of his body being explored, it was
Mhm.
just being humiliated in however the stranger wanted. And so he wasn't even aware of what his erogenous zones, genital erogenous zones were. And so by going methodically and mapping not only his body's erogenous zones, but his genitals erogenous zones, he came to discover all these new areas that provided new sensations of pleasure for him. And the tricky part when someone's really hardwired there, they're so used to the big dopamine hits of being humiliated. It really requires my presence, the practitioner's presence really has to be there. So when they're starting to drift or dissociate or wander, to bring them back to a part of their body or a memory that brings them really present.
Will you ever use any part of that, shall we say, shadowy or negative emotion or psychology to help bring them back? Because you're so kind, your presence is so
Mhm,
benevolent.
mhm.
Is that kind of a buzzkill sometimes for people? And you're also having to train, it sounds like you're describing people might not recognize that as being erotically potent or possible.
Yeah. Yeah. There can be a challenge in that, but there's always some part of the body that is
Mhm.
going to elicit something new, novel, and interesting enough, especially if if their body's never been mapped before. I have a lot of vulva owners who think that their breasts are not eliciting arousal. And it's because they've always been grabbed or turned like doorknobs. And so just
Yeah.
the light feathery touch and really taking your time, and usually for most people there's some part of the body that can be novel for them. And to your point, sometimes if someone has a hard wiring around humiliation, like I had one client, she could only orgasm when her hair was pulled. So I could incorporate not the level of hair pulling, but a light, gentle tug to remind the body that, oh,
Uh-huh.
there's something here as a bridge to that new kind of terrain of pleasure.
Oh, I love this because it is something, this neurological matrix that comprises our whole experience that is not just sensational, of course, it's also memory and everything that we are, all our history, our ancestral history, our
Yes.
our God, everything. It's amazing. So I love just your suggesting this, you're reminding, triggering aspects of this neurological mapping or matrix or however you want to call it. That's so beautiful. Does it ever make you uncomfortable or proud for that matter, being perhaps seen as a sex guru or
Um,
a sex
First of
master?
all,
How do you feel about that?
okay, first of all, I do not consider myself a sex guru or a sex master. Um,
You don't
no, I
consider yourself
don't.
a sex master?
Well, I consider myself, I recognize that I've developed a realm of expertise
Yeah.
in genital de-armoring and resolving trauma And I've certainly learned a lot of things along the way, but I don't see myself as that. I do know that I have been called that or referred to that. And I think it's just like all practitioners, it's really the art of space holding.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to safety, and I feel like the safety can be felt on a soul level, on an unconscious, intuitive level with people like us. Like when our clients come into the room, they know, they can feel it. They know in their bones that they're here for a reason. It might not make sense rationally, but they know they're supposed to be here with us. And so that's really the, I think, most potent and significant factor in someone's unraveling of their past trauma.
It's so clear too that you don't have judgments, which is such a significant part of safety, particularly in the realm of sexuality, because most people are trained to judge almost everything about sex and sexuality.
Yes.
So it's palpable in you and hopefully in myself that you aren't going to be met with judgment, even though you can expose or explore some really unusual things, because ultimately they're probably not that unusual.
No, no, they're not. That's the interesting thing is like any kind of kink or fantasy, what's underneath that is always the fascination. It's like, how did this kink or fantasy develop? And it's
Yeah.
almost always a desire for love, a desire for safety, a desire for attention. And so we're all little children, really. And we developed these strategies to get what we wanted, and it evolved into these sexual fantasies. Yeah, I'm glad you're touching on this because the non-judgment itself, especially when a client, like during an intake call or something, has never shared something because they feel it was so shameful, just to feel like there's someone they can tell for the first time, and the way it's received by us, that itself can be incredibly healing and change their whole perception of their self. I had a client once who she was sexually violated by her father, an older brother, and like a neighbor all before age 12. But she wired this sexual violation. Well, she experienced some level of pleasure because she always longed for the attention of these men in her life. Right.
Yes.
And this is the thing that's confusing for people to understand is yes, you can be violated sexually and not want something done to you. And physiologically, it can elicit arousal in your body. And this is what gets really confusing to survivors. In any case, during the whole Catholic Church investigations where it came out all this childhood sexual abuse, she would be reading the Boston Globe and she would get aroused reading about these altar boys being, and she thought she was a monster. She could
Mm.
tell a soul. And it was simply her understanding that this is very Pavlovian wiring that happens between abuse or violation and arousal that she's then being reminded of. And that just made her feel like, okay, I'm not a monster. But she was like shaking in tears. So that non judgment is huge simply because we do live in a very quick to judge society around sex.
I love how you're bringing in this primal longing for love. And when you were talking about this client who used to get kicked by his father, I was so touched by imagining this little boy who's just loves his father and just wants love from his father, that they get so conflated because it's too hard to imagine that our parent doesn't love us. Or we decide that, oh, love must look like this and this because that's what they're doing and they're my father, so they must love me. And
Mhm.
all of that just gets so twisted. Oh, well, they want to have sex with me, so that must mean they love me. And we're also bodies that are beautifully designed to respond to certain activities, whether they're wanted or appropriate or not. So, yes, it is super complicated and it makes people very afraid of their bodies, of course, and of their experience of self and sexuality for sure. I'm so grateful for the work you're doing, Rahi, and your students are doing out in the world, and can only imagine how much healing you're just bringing to all these people. It's just exquisite to me.
Well, may I serve the same reflection back to you, Allie? Creator of such a beautiful synergy of work between constellations and sexual healing, and you're a pioneer in the field.
Mm,
And it is a unique calling
yeah.
to pursue and hold space for this path for many reasons. But I just feel like it's such a window into humanity. And I'm so grateful to every client because they're our teachers. Their bodies are our teachers of what's possible in the human body.
What is difficult for you to hold this space and walk this path?
Well, I will say that I've learned over the years what my needs are post session, what I need to do to cleanse my energy, get out in nature. Because, like in the beginning, when I was wanting to learn everything and taking on a lot of clients, the material can be very heavy, especially when we're working with sexual trauma, depending on the nature of the trauma. And to hold deep, unintegrated emotions, it takes energy. And so I think what's been great for me is to learn over the years what I need. I generally don't see more than a client a day because my sessions tend to be quite lengthy. They go from 3 to 5 hours. So I only do one client a day, and I generally only do three clients a week. So
Mm.
there's space to really let that kind of metabolize and release from my system as well. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The other challenge about doing this work, it's a challenge and it's fun because you quickly learn who amongst your friends and family have sexual issues they don't want to deal with because they never ask you about your work or anything. You know what I mean? It's
Oh, is that why they don't?
it's like,
I thought they just didn't give a shit.
oh, well, it could be both. But that's what I found. I found that like 9 out of 10 people are fascinated with the work that we do. They want to know what the cases are like, because everyone's so fascinated about their own sexuality. But every once in a while, there'll be that one person who just needs to change the subject right away. And
Mhm.
at first, I thought it was funny, but now I have so much compassion for that person because it must be really difficult to live in the society we do and really feel shut down.
Do you still find sexuality, personal sexuality challenging in any way?
Not personally, but let me say that I'm in my 50s, and for the last 10 years, for most of it, it has been challenging just because I would go to some social event, I would connect with someone, and as soon as they found out what I did, they
Mm,
usually had some issue they wanted to have resolved. And then I would have to make a decision like, okay, does
mhm.
this feel like a client to me or does it feel like someone I want to date? And usually it's a client. But the reason I say it's not an issue for me now is I've been married since February and my partner is a somatic sex educator. And
Mhm.
so we really meet each other in so many ways, emotionally and sexually and professionally.
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Yeah. But I know how challenging it can be. And yeah, and it was a challenge for a long time for me.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge to have is not to be used and
Right.
to be met. And that's an interesting place because I was going to ask you about that earlier that I think there is a place for lovers to also be healers for and with each other. But it has
100%.
to be reciprocal.
Exactly. 100%. In my course, I tell people that the most potent way of genital de-armoring is conscious, present lovemaking with someone you feel safe with, where
Mhm.
you're going really slow and you're able to feel all the sensations, including the numbness and all the emotions, including the grief and the sadness. I mean, that's when the tissues can trust that, okay, I'm safe here to feel everything. And most clients' cervixes in my practice are pretty numb from being banged up against or medical procedures.
Birth.
Yeah, giving birth, colposcopies, like you name it. But
Yeah.
I've noticed that cervixes can really de-armor when the intention is really a sincere love. As a practitioner, I bring in universal love through my fingers. In partnership, that has really brought so much sensation back to a numb cervix. And so, yes, lovers can be so beautiful in holding space for each other, and it needs to be reciprocal, or else it just feels imbalanced and there's going to be resentment probably over time.
Oh, I think about this a lot, Rahi, and this gets back to dissociation of the genitals
Mm.
that our histories are in our genitals.
Yeah.
And also our love can be, our pain can be, our intentionality, all these things. And so few penis people think about, I've never heard people talk about this. That is literally potentially this love shaft, not just as the organ itself, the tissue itself, but also that it can laser up and in
Yes. Yes.
love and care and healing and intention. I'm using this gesture, this
Totally.
penetrative thrusting gesture of all that goodness literally fucking up into someone's body in
Yes.
in a way that who's taught that, unless perhaps you're in a tantra class or something, and who's taught to surround, if it's a penetrative experience, who's taught to surround whatever is entering the vaginal space, love and healing and goodness, that these aren't just organs. This isn't just a vehicle made of flesh. This is us, and that there's so much opportunity that gets missed.
So much opportunity. That's exactly it. I could not agree with you more. In fact, when you look at these Taoist images, we know that our organs are represented in our feet and in our hands. They're also represented in our genitalia, and they line up perfectly. Like when there's full penetration, the heart correlates to the penile head as it correlates to the entrance of the cervix. All the organs really line up. So you're really massaging and nourishing all of the organs. But to your point, this kind of brings us back to the first question. It can be an incredibly spiritual experience where you're really feeling aligned and met and whole, as I believe was our source, in the cosmos before we came into these human bodies. And so it is a way back to feeling that sense of wholeness and completeness. And the potent for healing and pleasure and consciousness when it comes to conscious lovemaking is, I mean, it remains the greatest mystery and the greatest invitation.
Ugh. So here's the gazillion-dollar question. What happens if you can't fucking find that other person with whom to have that experience? Do you just stay alone? Do you compromise? Do you just masturbate a lot? Do you be celibate? Do you go into polyamory and have numerous partners to try to aggregate your
Yeah, yeah.
the thing you're seeking? Or do you just go to sleep a bit in your body and sexuality because it's too painful to be missing that in your life? What do you do?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And I think it's a question everybody is going to need to investigate and come to their own
Yep.
you know, sense of truth around. But I am a real big advocate on self pleasuring. Yeah, especially depending on your age, it's important to make sure the tissues receive proper blood flow, energy flow, responsiveness, because if it's not used, it can atrophy depending on your age, and just to make sure the energy's flowing.
One more question before we start to wrap up, sadly.
Mhm.
Would you just talk about the difference between climax and orgasmicity? Because
Sure.
this is a huge missing element, an understanding in people that would help to open a pathway. It's that erroneous or just lack of information there that really gets in the way of what we're even doing with ourselves and each other. Oh,
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would even distinguish it further by distinguishing climax with ejaculation for penis owners and orgasm.
and
So,
some
yeah,
vulva owners.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So technically, I would say climax is reaching a peak of arousal or pleasure. That peak may not be an orgasm. And I define orgasm as a peak that is such that it involves involuntary contractions.
That's amazing because in my sexological training, it was the reverse. They
Mm.
said that climax is the actual
Invol-
involuntary, and that orgasm was any and all pleasure
Mm.
waves and sensations. So you speak about it in the reverse,
I speak about it in the reverse, but we might be describing the same thing,
probably. Yeah.
right? So in self-pleasure or lovemaking, there can be so many dozens of mini orgasms that do not feel like a climax, like a peak, and do not result in ejaculation. I'm a big fan of semen retention. Like, I find that if you refrain from ejaculation or climax, you actually start living in just an orgasmic state. It's like you're kind of buzzing. And then you go to Whole Foods and everyone's trying to help you because they can feel that buzz. So I am a big proponent of exploring your capacity for orgasm. Again, could be dozens of mini orgasms and maintaining, like, the more we expand our body's capacity for pleasure in an orgasmic state, the more that capacity will continue to expand and the more we'll be able to receive goodness and pleasure in life, whether it's at work or play or whatever. A climax is what I would describe as a peak, and ejaculation is the expulsion of fluid, which may not be a climax and may not be an orgasm. But I feel like I don't know why. Well, I do know why. I feel like our society is really fixated for penis owners on ejaculation because of porn. And I think most penis owners are missing the boat on their capacity for living orgasmic states and also living with an erection at any time they want because they're just giving up their chi through these ejaculations.
Yeah, I think that obsession with ejaculation started well before porn.
Yes.
But it
Yes.
certainly has been exacerbated by it, of course, because now we've totally fetishized it,
Yes.
and it's hard not to imagine, like, even now you're saying the word ejaculation gives me all these images, hard to forget, of just exaggerated ejaculation. But of course, it also is what leads to procreation and a sense of power and the millennia of focus there's been on male pleasure as opposed to female pleasure and the misunderstanding of female pleasure. And if you can't speak about it and even allow females to have their sexualities and their own potency, then of course you're not going to be focused on other things than your own fluids.
That is one of the greatest mistakes or disservices, or is just what you said, Ali. I think as a society and as a species, we have not understood properly and given space for the full realization of female pleasure.
For sure.
And speaking about orgasm and ejaculation and climax, studies show 70% of women or female bodies experience orgasms clitorally. Only 30% experience them vaginally, and very few experience them cervically via the cervix. And so there's a lot of potential, let's say, for so much more pleasure and consciousness and spirituality in our world.
Yeah, and I just recently asked a guest who's a renowned doctor and urologist and
Hmm.
does sex medicine about female ejaculation and what exactly that is. And I'm curious your view on it, your experience of it.
Well, we know it's ejaculate fluid that's released from the urethral ducts into the bladder. It's not urine. And some women love it because it's a sense of release and it can involve orgasm or not involve orgasm. I think it's important that we understand our own bodies. And if you have a vulva and you want to experience it, I think it's cool to explore and experience it.
Yeah. There's so much to say about all of that that I'd love to get into further. But what I really want to also mention before we have to wrap up is that one of the things that really bugs me and pains me even about the sexology world is that, yes, there is talk about people who have trouble having orgasms, but after listening to a conversation like this, and sometimes if I listen to conversations of people going on and on about how they're coming all over the place in every different way, in every different position, and with anybody and everybody and all over, and it can feel really overwhelming for people who are just learning to feel themselves sexually and orgasmically. And I would love for you to perhaps just suggest some things for people who may not ever have the privilege to come see you or another sexological body worker or have a beautiful lover to explore these things with, or maybe they do
Mhm.
have that. What do you recommend for people who may never have had an orgasm before or who may feel numb and armored and not really know how to approach that, not just physically, but also psychologically and emotionally? Because I know there can be so much shame about that, about one's capacity or a feeling of lack of capacity for orgasmic and sexual pleasure.
Totally. Well, first of all, I want to just point out what's much more prevalent and common than people talk about, because people who are inorgasmic, they generally don't talk about it. They don't share about it. And so I've seen different percentages, but it's way more common than people realize. So that's the first piece. The second piece is, again, if you are inorgasmic or if there is a challenge to orgasm, I can think it can be valuable to have an inquiry about what brings you pleasure. And it's not just physical or sexual pleasure, it's food pleasure, it's music pleasure, it's movement pleasure. Like what brings pleasure into your life? And start keeping a journal around pleasure. Because the more we focus on things, the more we're going to notice them and feel them. And clients who come who are inorgasmic, we really take the goal of orgasm off the table and just focus on what can expand your experience of sensation.
Mhm.
And that focus usually leads to orgasm and beyond orgasm. Because, like, when people are fixated on orgasm, it gets them in their mind and it keeps it very limited and rigid. But then again, a part of all of this inquiry is also asking, like, what is my relationship with my body and its consent? Because that usually has a lot of keys. And then some other things I'll mention around orgasm is for a lot of people, it's either a control issue, because orgasm is really surrendering control into something that's unknown. So I have a lot of clients who are in very controlling positions, CEOs and others, or they're very in their head, very mental, not in their bodies. And for some, for example, I had a client who by age 5, she lost her horse, her grandfather, and her dog. And she was afraid to feel good again because it meant she was going to lose it. So there
Mm.
can often be like this traumatic association of, God, I can't feel too good because it's, I don't know, what's something dangerous is going to happen. And that's something worth examining in your past as well.
And I'll just add to that because it was such a revelation when I realized this many years ago that if I orgasm with somebody, I'm much
Oh,
more likely to bond to them. And
yes.
they may not be there. They may not want a relationship. They may not love me. They may not feel the same way I feel towards them.
Mm.
And that's a different kind of danger. But there is wisdom in not necessarily opening one's body to that extent with the person you may be with. And so it may not be a issue of physiological malfunction or a psychological malfunction, but actually a deep understanding of what, as you have been so beautifully talking about, what is actually safe.
What is actually safe? Yes.
Mm.
I'm glad we came back to that because that's really
Oh,
such,
okay.
that really is like the body's pleasure, sexual responsiveness, it responds to safety, physical, emotional, psychological.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love you, Rahi. You're an awesome human. Thank you so much for this.
Allie.
And I have two last questions I ask everybody, which
Sure.
is how do you define embodiment?
Oh, that's really great. I define embodiment as the experience of inhabiting one's physiological vessel. So
Mm.
by inhabiting, we can inhabit with our awareness, with sensation, with breath. So it's almost like you inhabit a glove by filling it. So filling embodiment is the experience for me of really fitting the glove of your body, experiencing the inhabitation of your body.
So in that analogy, what or who is the hand?
You could say it's your soul, your
Mm.
consciousness. Yeah, yes.
And what do you enjoy most about being your particular body?
Expressing love in all the ways that it does. That's it.
Thank you so much. I loved this conversation.
Thank you, Ali. I loved it too. And I loved sharing this with you.
Yeah. All right. Well, to be continued.
Yes, looking forward to it. Bye.
Thanks so much for being with us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And we'd be so grateful if you could share it with a friend, leave a review, and rate the podcast. This really does help us reach more people in our mission to expand the global understanding, experience, and celebration of body brilliance. And just so you know, our events and content remain free in our effort to expand the meaning of intelligence, but we do gratefully accept donations to help with our operating costs. So if you have a bit extra and feel so inspired, you can find the link to support us in the show notes. And while you're there, check out all the resources we've included to help you dive deeper into today's topics. You can also visit www.thebrilliantbodypodcast.com for a complete list of episodes, body meditations, and many more brilliant things. And if you're curious to explore how I work with clients and students to reclaim body brilliance, visit my website at www.alimezey.com. And lastly, a huge hearty thank you to my co-producer and co-editor, the brilliant Florence Popoff, and to Blair, Mr. One Man Band Wilson, for our theme music. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, stay loving, and reclaim your brilliant body.